Steam Deck was announced back in July of 2021, I wasn't going to pick one up. The main reason being I did not have a big enough Steam library to justify the purchase. After a week of debating on it, I decided to go ahead and pre-order it. I did have to wait till Q2 of 2022 because I took that week to think about it, but I did get one and I'm actually happy I did change my mind. Now the Steam Deck has become my #1 go-to when it comes to playing my games. Since then, my Steam Deck is pretty much my go-to for all my gaming needs. I have a very huge library because it's kind of influenced me on how I buy games, and now when I go to ahead and purchase something, I make sure it's available on Steam, 1, and 2, if it's going to run really good on the Steam Deck. If not, I do have my PC that I do use from time to time, but for the most part, I really try to make sure it runs good on the Steam Deck first. Fast forward to 2023 and Valve announced the Steam Deck OLED. When that was first announced, I really wasn't sure if I should get one or not. Eventually, I did pick one up, and that's what this video is about. But before I get into that, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. I am trying to hit 1,000 subscribers. I am so close to hitting that number, so definitely hit that like and subscribe button. It does help out a lot, as well as share the channel. That helps out even more. So let's go ahead and dive into my thoughts on the Steam Deck OLED and if it's worth the upgrade from the LCD model. Now, first thing first, this is definitely my opinion and what I think about the Steam Deck OLED. I know your opinion might be different from what I believe in, but I will set these expectations, and the biggest thing that I want to focus on is the value I personally get out of it. When I think of a portable system or a handheld, I always think battery life first and foremost. So that is going to be a key point when it comes to the Steam Deck OLED. When you look at the Steam Deck OLED, it doesn't look that much different from the LCD model. There are a few minor differences, such as the screen being a 7.4-inch OLED display versus the 7-inch LCD display, and a couple of other minor things such as the thumbstick being pretty much black everywhere, and the power button being red versus just the black that was on the LCD model. The other thing that's a little bit different on the thumbstick is that they're a little bit more concave than the LCD model, which makes it a lot easier to grip the thumbsticks, and I really do like that. I did find myself at least my fingers slipping off on the LCD model when I was playing certain games that had to do a lot of movement, such as Resident Evil 4, when I'm just constantly pressing the up button. My finger would slowly start slipping away and I would have to readjust my thumb on the thumbstick, but with the OLED model, I haven't had that issue yet. Everything else about the OLED model pretty much is physically the same as the LCD model. Now it is a little bit lighter, which is nice, and that's something that you actually feel right away when you pick one up. I was actually pretty surprised because I know it was lighter, and you can see in the specs that it is a tad bit lighter, but the minute you hold it, it's definitely noticeable, which is really good. And it is noticeable especially for long periods of time. Usually when I play my Steam Deck, it's usually at night when I'm laying in bed. And yeah, I don't really get that fatigue that I would get with the LCD model. Now moving on to the inside of the OLED, we have a 6nm APU versus the 7nm APU that was in the LCD model. That 6nm APU helps out a lot in terms of power efficiency. Because of the APU being a little bit smaller, it doesn't need as much power, therefore giving you a better battery life overall. They also upgraded the Wi-Fi chip from Wi-Fi 5 to Wi-Fi 6E, giving you a faster internet connection as well as also better download speeds, which is really good because when it comes to downloading, I do feel that the LCD model was just a little bit slow, especially compared to all my other devices. But it's nice to have Wi-Fi 6E because now when I'm downloading a game, it is pretty snappy and it is very noticeable. The other big change is the battery. The battery has gone up to a 50 watt-hour battery versus the 40 watt-hour battery that was in the LCD model. Again, with all of these changes, you do see a noticeable difference in the battery life, which I will talk about a little later on. Some of the other minor changes as well is that there is a separate Bluetooth chip now versus it being integrated with the Wi-Fi chip, which does help out a lot. This allows a function such as waking up from a controller, kind of like the consoles do, which is pretty neat. So if you have it on standby and on the dock, If you have a controller paired to it already, you can easily go ahead and press the home button and it will power the Steam Deck, giving you that console-like feel. And with everything I just mentioned, it might sound like minor changes, but on paper, that's what you see, but in reality, you get a lot more, and it's very noticeable. Going back to the OLED display, there's quite a lot going on there. Because of the OLED display, of course you get a lot more battery efficiency, therefore getting a better battery life overall, but the OLED display is also 90 Hz, so you can play games at a higher frame rate. I've been playing Star Ocean: The Second Story R at 90 FPS, and man, can I tell you, it looks phenomenal in 90 FPS. Not only that, I am getting great battery life. Typically, I try to game before I go to sleep as much as I can, and I can game anywhere from 2 to 3 hours before I actually go to bed. I used to use the LCD model to kind of be like my alarm clock and let me know when it's time to go to bed, because by then, typically the battery is almost dead. But with the OLED model, I haven't gotten that yet, and now I have to really be looking at the time to make sure it's not too late before I need to go ahead and shut that off. With Star Ocean: The Second Story R, I'm getting anywhere from 4 to 5 hours of battery life at 90 FPS and medium settings. For the most part, the Steam Deck stays at that 90 FPS. I'm also playing at 10 watts. Sometimes I lower it to 9 watts depending on the area, and I keep that, like I said, 4 to 5 hour battery life, and for the most part it is set at 90 FPS. Sometimes in the overworld or like the world map, it does drop a little bit. It'll go down to the 80s and 70s. In a certain part, it did go down to like the 60s, but it usually stays around the 80s and 70s in the world map. And every town and dungeon, it's pretty much locked at a 90 FPS, which is nice. That game is also the perfect match to the OLED. I remember playing the demo on the Switch OLED, and it really looked gorgeous. Now with the Steam Deck OLED being able to play at higher settings than the Switch, the colors do pop. It's unfortunate that the game itself doesn't support HDR, and actually there's quite a few games that I have in my library that don't support HDR, but for the most part, the OLED display does help out a lot, especially with that intro sequence that the game has. Basically in that intro sequence, it's done in space in some other areas, and there's a lot of blacks. And you can definitely see the contrast and the colors. Oh man, it just looks amazing. I'll probably have some of that footage playing in the background as I'm explaining this, but it does look gorgeous. And man, I can't tell you how many times I just go ahead and boot up my Steam Deck, take a look at the opening animation before I go ahead and dive into the game, because it just looks great. Now, I will tell you this, if you are thinking of getting a Steam Deck OLED and hoping for a huge performance difference, you're not gonna see that. I do know that there are some videos out there and some articles out there that do say that there is an improvement in terms of some performance where you might get, an extra 5 to 10 FPS. As far as the games that I've played, which is a lot of Japanese RPGs, I have not noticed that difference. For the most part, the games kind of play the same as they did on the LCD model, and I don't think it's that big of a difference. The big plus, like I said, is that 90 Hz display and the OLED display, which does help out in terms of being able to maximize games. For example, if you have maybe a 2D game that can run at 90 FPS with no problem, you can maximize that. As far as what I play, usually I set still the FPS to 40 FPS if it's a more demanding game, because I do try to preserve battery life as much as possible. If not, then I will go ahead and jump up that frame rate if I can. Star Ocean is one of those where I'm able to get a still really good frame rate at a higher or at a mid TDP but higher frame rate, and that works out for that end. But if I were to go to, let's say, Star Ocean: The Divine Force, which is a little bit more demanding, well, maybe not a little bit, a lot more demanding, I definitely can't hit that 90 FPS, so I just usually set the counter to 40 FPS and go from there. There are other games in my library that are just pretty much locked at 60 FPS, so I can't go any higher than that, and I usually just go ahead and lower it to 40 FPS anyways, because at least for me, I don't see that huge of a difference between 40 and 60, but it is noticeable when it hits 90. So pretty much, I wouldn't buy it if you're hoping for a performance boost. But if you want a better display overall, being able to maximize games that are not that demanding, and a better battery life, then I would definitely look towards the Steam Deck OLED. See, the reason I went with the Steam Deck OLED, part of it of course was the OLED display itself. After having to switch OLED, I really like the OLED display, and honestly, that was actually a factor of me buying games on my Switch still. It was having like a 2D art or something that wasn't that demanding and I think would look great on an OLED display, I would typically pick it up on the Switch OLED. One of those games was Octopath Traveler 2, where I did buy it on the Switch OLED. Now that I own the Steam Deck OLED, I probably will rebuy Octopath Traveler 2 just to play on the Steam Deck OLED, because I can get a little bit better looking picture, because there's, for whatever reason, there's like a blur filter on Octopath and it's very annoying and noticeable. Triangle Strategy had the same thing going on with it, where on the Steam Deck, of course, it being more powerful than the Switch, I can kind of get rid of that blur filter and just make things look a lot better. But games like that, where the pixel art styles or the colors just pop out, really show off the OLED display. And pretty much everything in my library is like that. I have like Mega Man, for example, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot's a good example of that, the Star Ocean games, as well as some other games out there that might have cel shaded graphics or pixel art. The other thing is the battery life. The battery life is a pretty big difference. Now again, I'm going back to the Switch comparison. It's kind of like jumping from the Switch LCD to the Switch OLED. There was quite a significant battery difference between the two. With the Switch OLED, I was definitely able to play a game such as Breath of the Wild for like 5 hours before the battery died, where on the OG Switch, you're looking around 2 hours. You see pretty much that same difference on the OLED and then some. There's a lot of games that I've been playing where I was getting about 2 to 3 hours of battery life on the LCD model. I'm now able to get 5, 6, or even 7 hours of battery life. Some of the emulation or the emulators I've been playing and the games I've been emulating, I've been able to get almost 10 hours of battery life out of it, which is amazing. And it's great. The downside to it is that I don't really need to charge it as much, so sometimes I forget to charge it, and when I want to use it, it's almost dead. So that is a downside to that, but for the most part, I do like that I have this nice battery life. Now for the answer to the big question. Is it worth upgrading from a Steam Deck LCD model to the Steam Deck OLED? My answer would be yes, and for a few reasons. If you do want that OLED display and that just crisp, vibrant display that supports HDR, also that 90 Hz display, which helps out a lot, faster Wi-Fi with Wi-Fi 6E, and a way better battery life, then it's a no-brainer. Jump up to the OLED because it does have a lot to offer. Not only that, you can go ahead and sell your old LCD model for some money, and you can get a little bit of return on investment. For example, buying an OLED is about $550, but if you sell your Steam Deck OLED, let's say or your Steam Deck LCD model for, let's say, I don't know, $300 or so, then you're technically only paying about $250. I guess with tax, you're paying about $300, which in the long run, I think it's well worth it. But if you're looking for better performance overall from what you already have, the Steam Deck OLED is not that. With that, I would definitely recommend the ROG Ally. Now, I did make a video on the ROG Ally, so you can hear my thoughts there, but the biggest issue I personally have with the ROG Ally was the battery life wasn't really there, unfortunately. And yeah, I personally, I just returned the ROG Ally, picked this up instead. Now, there are a couple other downsides to having the Steam Deck OLED. One of it is, of course, it is Linux and not Windows, which to me technically is not a downside, but in terms of the gaming side of things, it could be a downside because you can't go ahead and just get Game Pass games natively. You can do Game Pass through the cloud and stuff like that. Epic Game Store, of course, is not compatible. Now, there are ways around. You can go ahead and download like Heroic Launcher or Lutris to go ahead and download your Epic games. But for games like Fortnite and stuff like that, anything that has anti-cheat or pretty much online, more than likely it's not going to work at all. There are some games that are online like Elden Ring that do work no problem. There's some other games out there, I can't really think of it right now, but for the most part, if it supports that anti-cheat, it's probably not going to work on the Steam Deck. In there, I would definitely recommend an ROG Ally or even a Legion Go for that stuff. The other bit of things is you can technically get Windows, but from what I've heard, it's not the best. Like, I've seen people say you can go ahead and just install Windows on a micro SD card, pop it in, and then boot it up that way, which seems to work out. But there's some driver issues, such as like you won't get audio, so the speakers won't work. You have to use like a headphone jack. There's some other stuff like the Steam controller might not be recognized, so you have to use a Bluetooth controller, and there's just a lot more hassle into doing that. But you can definitely get Windows available on the Steam Deck if you really want to. I thought about doing a video on that, and I just don't know when, because that seems like it's going to be a lot of work to go ahead and get that running, a lot of troubleshooting and going back and forth. So we'll see if I decide to make a video of Windows running on the Steam Deck. But anyways, let me know what you think about the Steam Deck OLED. Are you going to pick up one? Do you think it's well worth it? Like I said, me personally, I thought it was worth it. I'm happy I have the Steam Deck OLED. The LCD model I gave to my kids, and they're enjoying the Steam Deck LCD. But I definitely think it was worth the price that I paid. I'm enjoying it a lot more than I am with the ROG Ally. And yeah, I can't wait to see what's next in the future when it comes to the Steam Deck, because I do think the Steam Deck 2 might fix a lot of issues. The other thing I do hope is that somehow it's figured out to kind of get the anti-cheat stuff working on Linux, so I can play Dragon Ball FighterZ, which would be really nice, or even Fortnite. Maybe Epic can finally put Fortnite on Steam Deck so I can go ahead and play on there. I doubt it though. I mean, as much as Epic is trying to go ahead and push for, you know, all these marketplaces and stuff like that, and put their game everywhere they want, they don't want to put it on Linux for whatever reason. Don't know why. Anyways, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Like I said, trying to hit 1,000 subscribers. So close. Every little bit does count. Share the channel, it helps out a lot. Also, hang out with me on my streams. I do stream twice a week, pretty much on Thursday and Friday. And every Sunday we have the podcast where we talk about pretty much what's going on in the gaming industry. My name is James. Catch you guys next time.